welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have a book series review for you, and today I'm going to be talking about the Star Wars The New Jedi Order series. This is a series that I just recently finished up. I've been working on it for a long time. I started this series in the summer of 2021. I read the first three books during 2021, then took a little over a year off because I had to get the rest of the books. And began it again with book 4 in January or February of last year. I'm gonna first talk a little bit about what this series is for those of you who may not be aware of what this series is, and then I'll talk a bit about the series itself, what I liked about it, what I didn't like so much about it, and all that kind of stuff. So this is a 19-book series taking place in the post-Return of the Jedi era of the Star Wars Legends or Expanded Universe timeline. So these books are no longer canon, but they are, in my opinion, still well worth reading, as is the rest of the EU. These books take place about, I think, 25 or 30 years after Return of the Jedi. There's been a lot of other books taking place between Return of the Jedi and these books. And these kind of start both in terms of the publishing of Star Wars and in terms of the actual, like, in-universe timeline, kind of a new era for Star Wars, because these books were kind of the ones that came at the end of the Bantam era and the beginning of the Del Rey era in terms of the publishing. And these books also kind of marked a shift in Star Wars storytelling in terms of, like, in-universe storytelling, starting these huge series like The New Jedi Order and Legacy of the Force, Fate of the Jedi, things like that, marking some shifts in kind of tone and things like that. Also, I think, marking a shift in terms of the focus, especially in terms of the characters, because in this series you really have the next generation of characters, the children of Han and Luke and Leia and all of them, having, you know, the children of these characters kind of coming more into the forefront and becoming the heroes of their own story like their parents were. And so it is very much like this new beginning. Like the series itself is called The New Jedi Order, and I think that's a very appropriate title because it's not only a, you know, new beginning for the Jedi Order, as you might assume, but it's kind of a new beginning in general. Fresh start in some ways. One of the things they went into the series wanting to do is really kind of do something new, something different. The series even begins, I won't spoil it for the sake of those who haven't read it, but those of you who have read this series, or at least are familiar with it, know what happens towards the beginning of the series. The series begins with this kind of notion that this, you know, the stakes are higher. This is very much like a turning point in Star Wars storytelling, if you look at it kind of historically, and things like that. And so, very big shift. And as far as what the actual storyline of this series is, as I said, takes place a couple decades after the original trilogy. And you have Han and Luke and Leia and all of those original trilogy characters, as well as their children and people who have come to Luke's Jedi Academy in order to kind of form this new Jedi Order. And the New Republic and all of them, as well as the Imperial Remnant and other factions in the galaxy, being faced with this threat of the Yuuzhan Vong. Now, the Yuuzhan Vong are an extragalactic threat, meaning they came from an entirely different galaxy and are now invading this galaxy, and are intent on destroying everything in their way to conquer the entire galaxy. They're very like religious fanatics, like believing that they are destined to conquer and take this galaxy for themselves, and believe that the people of this galaxy, you know, their technology is like living technology, and they have very different kind of philosophies on life and ways of looking at things that are very different from the characters within the Star Wars galaxy. And so they kind of believe that you know, the people of this galaxy are infidels and must be destroyed. It's kind of the basic gist of this series. It's a 19-book series, takes place over about 5 years of this war between the Yuuzhan Vong and the Star Wars galaxy as a whole, predominantly the New Republic and the Jedi Order, but also bringing in, like I said, other factions such as the Imperial Imperial remnant, the Empire is still around and kicking, greatly reduced in power and influence from what it once was in the original trilogy, but still certainly present, as well as other factions and other characters who contribute to the war effort. So as far as my thoughts on this series, what I think it did well, of which there are so many things. First of all, I love the premise of this series, especially the premise of the Yuuzhan Vong. The Yuuzhan Vong are an extremely unique villain for this series, especially for the time. Like, nowadays, you know, it's been 25 years since this series started. And so we've had other unique types of villains in Star Wars now. I'm reminded of something like the various villains of the High Republic series in the current canon books and things like that. So we've had other unique villains, but we have yet to see, I think, something quite like the Yuuzhan Vong. And they, especially for the time, were something very new and very different for Star Wars, which kind of, again, like I said earlier, the direction of Star Wars storytelling in the books was really shifting around this time in a lot of ways, and I think the Yuuzhan Vong were indicative of that. Very different, very unique, very interesting. It's a very different culture from anything ever seen in Star Wars before, and I think that this race of people is a huge highlight of this series because it's a very different culture and they're very interesting to learn about. Really interesting, like, religious beliefs, really interesting cultural beliefs, the technology they use, all kinds of stuff. They're just very interesting and one of the highlights of the series for me. I also love the epic scale and scope of this series. As I said, this is a 19-book series made up of several single books as well as a lot of duologies, as well as one trilogy. And so you have all these different books that are telling this one giant story, but each doing something a little bit different, telling a different piece of the story. Some of the books are very large in scope, covering a lot of different characters and a lot of different events, things like Vector Prime, the first book, Star by Star, it's kind of one of the middle books, and other ones like that, Destiny's Way, that are very much like the big event books. When these were originally published, they were the hardcovers, whereas the other in-between books were paperbacks only. And so you have these big event books where it's just a bunch of characters, a bunch of stuff happening. Then you have other books that are a little bit smaller scale and really delve into particular characters. You have something like the Agents of Chaos duology, which the first book in that duology focuses a lot on Han, whereas the second book focuses a lot on Leia. You have Traitor focusing a lot on Jacen Solo. You have Dark Journey focusing a lot on Jaina Solo, things like that. So you have a variety of different focuses throughout the series, but the scale and scope of it is something that was fully unprecedented, I think, in Star Wars storytelling prior to this, and has rarely even been matched since, in my opinion. The only thing that I personally have experienced thus far that has rivaled something like New Jedi Order is something like the Old Republic era in general, with the video games and the books and the comics, or something like the High Republic, or things like that. It's just a very ambitious, very big series, and that's something that I really appreciate about it. And also just the fact that there are all of these different little stories that contribute to a larger whole is something that I really enjoy about it. I also love the story itself that's being told. And there are some books in this series that I think are weaker than others for sure, but I think the vast majority of them are minimum good, if not great, if not amazing. In fact, there are at least, I would say, 5 books in this series that I would consider to be top tier Star Wars books. But I love the story that this tells. You have a bunch of different characters going on different journeys, really interesting character arcs throughout the series. Of particular note for me, I really loved Jacen Solo's arc. I really loved Anakin Solo in this series. I really loved Tahiri as well in this series. And one of the main villains as well, Nom Anor, one of the Yuuzhan Vong. All these characters have different character arcs that they go on across the series, where they start in one place and end in a very different place. And of course, with 19 books, you get to see plenty of the development that they go through across this series. And the story in general, just seeing the kind of push and pull of the Yuuzhan Vong versus the New Republic, taking victories, taking losses, and things like that, and the way that these two groups interact with one another, both on the battlefield and interpersonally. is something that I also really enjoyed. So the story it's a little hard for me to get into because there's so much of it, but I think that in general this series tells a very compelling story about this threat that brings the galaxy also together, and brings the characters within this series closer together, and brings factions who were once enemies together and things like that. It's really cool, and also tells very compelling character stories throughout it, and compelling stories of war and battle, really big events, very big revelations about the different aspects of the Yuuzhan Vong, aspects of the Star Wars galaxy itself, all kinds of things like that, and I just really appreciate that about this series as well. I also really appreciate the risk taking within this series. There's a lot of things that this series does that are very unique for Star Wars storytelling, especially again for the time. And no spoilers here, of course this is a spoiler-free review, but there are several character deaths within this series that are very impactful. There are really big moments that are very impactful and exciting, and things that happen in the series that I think are very surprising and unprecedented, even like character deaths or different things going on with characters aside, like actual events within this series that are surprising and unprecedented within Star Wars storytelling, things that seem like they're too out there for them to actually do. I'm reminded of something like the ending of Star by Star, which for those of you who've read that book, you know what I'm talking about. Or even stuff later in the series, or as I said earlier, towards the beginning of the series. Just all kinds of things about this series that show that this is more than just what had come before. Before this series, you had a lot of Star Wars stories that were not necessarily averse to taking risks, but they certainly played things a little bit safer than this series does. And this series, right from the beginning, is, as I said earlier, kind of saying this is a turning point, this is a point of change for Star Wars publishing. This series is going to do things that you didn't even think that we would do, and that's something I really appreciate about it. One last thing that I'm going to talk about, because this video is getting a bit long, one other thing that I want to mention is the variety of different authors that contributed to this series. Now, you could probably say this is a weakness because it's not just one person's vision or things like that. I personally really enjoyed getting a variety of different people because they all have different characters that they wanted to write, different writing styles, and things like that, even though I didn't love every author's voice within the series. For example, the Force Heretic trilogy, which not only was a little hit and miss for me in terms of the content, but also the writing style, just didn't quite land for me. But it is very nice to have this one big series in which you have that kind of variety, where you can have people like Michael Stackpole alongside Greg Keyes, alongside Shane Dixon, Sean Williams, who did Force Heretic, alongside Matthew Stover, and all these people have very distinct and unique ways of telling their stories, which is something that I think is really cool. So you not only get a story that's very ambitious and large in scope in terms of the actual content of the stories and the storytelling, but even in the way that it is being told to you, which I really appreciate as well. As far as things that I think this series doesn't do quite as well, the main thing is just not every book will land most likely for you. There were a handful of books in the series that didn't quite land for me. I thought were just decent or things like that. I don't think this series had any bad books in it, but there were certainly some weaker ones, which in a 19-book series, that's to be expected. But I think that it is a testament to how great this series, just because of how few of those books there are. I would say there's maybe 5 out of the 19 at most of the books in this series that I would say are just okay. And there are a whole lot of really good ones, I think, and a lot of really great ones. And that's kind of the main downside to the series, is just not every book's going to be great, and that's, I think, just the way things go with a big series like this. I do also think that this series, for some people, will just naturally turn you off because of the kind of story it is. I know that a lot of people were not happy with some of the decisions that were made in the series as it was coming out, and so that is also something that could be a factor here if you're not a fan of some particular story decisions or things like that, or the tone. This tone of the series is much darker than the usual for Star Wars and things like that. So that is also something that could be an issue for some people, but for me, I personally was fine with all of it. So not a whole lot of major downsides to the series. I think I really enjoyed it a lot. I think it is well worth reading if you are interested in it. I would recommend probably reading some of the other books first. For me, I dove into the series probably earlier than I should have. But I also have kind of been aware of certain things about characters in the series and things for a long time. So I think I had enough of an awareness to kind of learn as I went. But I would recommend going back, reading some of the other books that are relevant to this series prior to starting it. Maybe someday, once I've become a little more well-read in the EU myself, maybe I'll be able to do a video on that topic. But I do think that this series is well worth reading if you think that you're ready for it. It's a lot to get through. Like I said, 19 books. It's a lot of stuff, and it's a lot to keep track of, a lot of characters, a lot of storylines, but I think it is well worth reading if you are able to and want to. So that's pretty much all I got for this video. Just kind of wanted to do a little bit of a wrap up now that I've finally finished this series, kind of talk about my overall thoughts on it and things like that. If you've read The New Jedi Order, let me know in the comments what you thought of it. What were some of your favorite books, some of your least favorite books, things like that, what you thought of the series in general. I will probably be continuing in my journey through the expanded universe soon. I'm planning to do the Darkness trilogy, and then follow that up with the two other major series, Legacy of the Force and Fate of the Jedi. That'll probably take me another couple of years to get through all of those books, and I still need to get my hands on most of them as well. But I'm very happy to have now finally finished this series, both because it's just very satisfying to have finished it, and also because now I get to go on to experience all these other stories that I've heard such great things about over the years, and all of that kind of thing. And also, before I get done here, I do also want to mention that I do have reviews for most of these books on my channel. I think all but the first three I have reviews for on my channel, so you can go check those out if you would like to see my thoughts on particular books in this series. And also, coming up here in a couple weeks, I'm going to be having a ranking of the series coming out, which I did with my friend Jonathan Cohn, another fellow booktuber who has a great channel that you should go check out. But we did a ranking of the series together that is going to be releasing here in a week or two, so keep an eye out for that as well if you are a fan of the series. That video will be spoilers allowed though, so if you have not read the series before, I'd recommend probably skipping that one for the moment. But if you have read the series before, then definitely keep an eye out for that, because that was a lot of fun to make and I think you'll enjoy it. So that's pretty much it for this video. Again, let me know in the comments if you've read the series and your thoughts on it. It's pretty much it for today, so thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.